Senator Cotton.
Ms. Turner, in your opening statement, you called the so-called exception clause of the 13th Amendment a gaping loophole. Do you believe that is a loophole?
I do. It is the foundation of prison labor programs today, and it led to the labor programs we have today that we truly have forced labor.
So you think a loophole implies it was unintended or accidental or omission? You think the people who drafted the 13th Amendment and ratified it didn't know what they were doing?
Oh, I think it was absolutely intentional, and it allowed for the use of incarcerated people to replace this free labor force provided by chattel slavery. And we saw it in some states, for instance, in Texas, following the passage of the 13th Amendment. The state of Texas purchased 10 plantations and began running them as prisons, some of which still run today.
So did prisons use labor before the 13th Amendment was passed?
Yes.
So it was just continuing a longstanding practice. It wasn't replacing anything.
It expanded. It allowed for the expansion of prison labor programs, and in fact became so lucrative that it led to passage of laws such as the Black Codes that encouraged the reincarceration of black men on specialist charges to continue to work in prisons and to provide profit for prisons both in the North and in the South.
And it's your testimony that we need to have a constitutional amendment to repeal that clause?
Yes, there's no place for forced labor in the United States.
Mr. Lehman, as I already mentioned in my opening remarks, in 1930, this committee, quote, unanimously conceded that idleness in prison breeds disorder and that prison jobs help maintain orders in prison by reducing idle time. Does modern day research back up that assertion from almost 100 years ago?
In general, yes, although I think it's an underevaluated question. The Minnesota study I cited earlier finds that there's a strong association between the fraction of time spent working and the level of misconduct declining. That study cites prior research, including, I believe, a study of the federal prison employment system, then called Unicor, which finds that compared to matched controls, people who work are less likely to engage in misconduct in prisons. And the causal story is pretty straightforward. If you're working, it's hard to engage in misconduct.
Okay. And the committee back then also found that prison jobs help inmates acquire, quote, the habits of industry. Is that still the case today?
Yes, and I think the strongest finding in the evidence is that prison labor, even unskilled prison labor, and this goes back to the study of Italian workers, even unskilled prison labor increases labor force involvement, increases wages, increases earnings following incarceration. That, to me, says if it does nothing else, prison labor is a way to improve people's labor market outcomes after they leave prison.
Okay. Senator Booker has a bill that would require prisons to pay inmates the same federal minimum wage that law-abiding American workers outside prison are entitled to receive. I want to explore the financial pressures that Americans face today thanks to Joe Biden's inflationary economy. Do prison inmates have to pay for rent or mortgage?
Not to the best of my knowledge, Senator.
Do they pay for grocery bills?
I don't believe so, Senator.
Car payments?
No, sir.
Insurance payments?
No, sir.
Gas to drive to work?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Any other daily expenses that most law-abiding American citizens have to worry about?
With certain conspicuous exemptions in some states, in general, no, prisoners are not responsible for those.
If prisons were forced to pay inmates those higher wages, probably a lot higher than what the current minimum wage is, given other Democratic proposals, who is ultimately going to be paying for those higher wages?
In contexts where they're employed by the state or other public entities, the taxpayer ultimately funds those public entities. If they're employed indirectly by private employers, then the people who are paying for those private employers, but that makes their labor much less competitive in that context.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.